Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Soul Land 2 Peerless Tangmen based on novel. So let's start. These people who are here to kill the White Tiger Duke are going all out. This should be a Class 8 stationary soul cannon. Be careful. Huo Yuhao shouted almost subconsciously. He also felt very weird when he shouted these two words. Why am I concerned about his safety? Boom. Suddenly, the entire Mingdo mountain range seemed to shake. A huge, deafening explosion shook the region covered by the earthen light. Debris scattered all around, and the intense shockwaves instantly engulfed more than 1,000 square meters. Defend! The White Tiger Duke shouted. He didn't retreat. His first, third, and fifth soul rings flashed. His figure instantly doubled in size. As he smacked his tiger palms together, a layer of intense white light started to spread out, with his body at the center. The shockwaves that were coming towards him were blocked. When he saw this scene, Huo Yuhao, who subconsciously moved to shield Wang Donga, was a little dazed. Given the White Tiger Duke's abilities, he would not be dealt much harm if he only protected himself. However, the barrier he erected covered an extremely wide area. He was bound to be drained at a much faster rate. Explosions rang continuously. The ground started to fissure, starting from the center point of the explosion. These fissures quickly extended in all directions. One side of the path that they were on was a cliff, while the other side was a tall mountain. Although the mountain pass was considered quite wide, there were many rocks falling from the sky after the explosion occurred. Landslide. The White Tiger bodyguards were deservedly called the elites of the elites. Even though their individual strengths were insignificant in the face of such a terrifying explosion, they tried to gather together at this point. A portion of them with shields lifted them up to block the falling rocks and incoming shockwaves. The 4 special guards rushed forward without any hesitation, and helped the White Tiger Duke with some of the pressure he was facing. However, the incoming shockwaves were still too strong, so strong that they were driven back as they were struck. Huo Yuhao already roughly knew what the soul tool was. It was a Class 8 stationary soul cannon shell called a landslide shell. When soul tools were at least Class 7, those with special effects would be given their own names. This was especially true for stationary soul cannon shells. There were all types of names for them. This landslide shell was one of them. It was supposed to be a Class 7 stationary soul cannon shell. However, it was classified as a Class 8 shell after special formation arrays and materials were used to strengthen its cloaking and obstructive capabilities. It had very strong penetrating abilities. It would immediately drill into the ground once it landed, tapping into its rare metal formation that had a great affinity for earthen elements. It could drill into soil or granite in the shortest possible time, before unleashing an immense shockwave. The shock that it unleashed was equivalent to 100 shot cannon shells, simulating the strength of an explosion and enabling it to cause a landslide. This landslide shell wasn't considered very lethal among the Class 8 stationary soul cannon shells. However, it was more stable, which allowed it to be hidden effectively. Its effect on a battlefield could be quite great, especially in strategic attacks like this. The enemy's goal was very simple: block off the White Tiger Duke's return route and buy time for them to assassinate him. General, quickly leave. Don't care about us, the special guard who was a soul sage shouted anxiously. Right now, the strongest shockwave had already passed. However, the White Tiger Duke didn't leave. With his cultivation, flying at a low altitude was nothing. However, he turned back and kept on unleashing his White Tiger meteor shower in the air. He crushed the falling rocks that were going to hit his men. As Huo Yuhao looked at him drifting in mid-air, he felt as if something were choking him in his chest. He is actually risking being assassinated in order to protect his subordinates. Dai Hao shouted, cut the crap. Soldiers, get ready to fight the enemy. All of you are my warriors and my fellow soldiers. I won't leave any one of you behind. We'll remain here and wait for reinforcements. As he spoke, he lifted his hand and a beam of bright light shot into the sky. They weren't very far from the base. They wouldn't need to wait too long for reinforcements to arrive. After the aerial attacks and the explosion that had just occurred, their camp should have been put on alert, and reinforcements should be on the way. A huge hole a few hundred meters wide had been blown apart in front of them. It was impossible for them to traverse it on foot. If the White Tiger Duke left on his own, he would be forsaking his White Tiger bodyguards, who consisted of more than 100 men. In a war, such a situation was very common. However, the White Tiger Duke didn't make that decision. He was their general, and the soul of the Star Luo Empire's military. He was a true hero. There was no way he could forsake his soldiers and brothers. In addition, it might not be a wrong choice to defend here. After all, it was very difficult to tell where the enemy would come from. When Dai Huobin saw that his father was unwilling to leave, he started to turn anxious. He hurriedly asked Huo Yuhao, "What do we do?" Huo Yuhao clenched his fist tightly. "What else can we do? Let's help him." He couldn't decide for the White Tiger Duke. The only thing they could do now was help him guard this place. In addition, they weren't too far from their base. They still had a chance. Huo Yuhao activated his spiritual detection and covered the area where the White Tiger bodyguards were. Huo Yuhao couldn't share his spiritual power with everyone, but he shared it with the White Tiger Duke and the 4 special guards from earlier. With Huo Yuhao's help, the White Tiger Duke was able to more efficiently intercept the falling rocks with his White Tiger meteor shower. All the large rocks were destroyed by his meteor shower. Wang Donga had also opened up her radiant butterfly goddess wings at this moment. With Huo Yuhao's spiritual detection, she unleashed her light of the butterfly goddess to help the White Tiger Duke. She further lowered the threat of the landslide. The bodyguards weren't idle, either. Although not all of them had shields, they still used their weapons to sweep the falling rocks away from them. While there were still some casualties, there weren't too many. At this point, streaks of red light suddenly flashed from afar. They appeared in a very elaborate pattern, and started to move towards the White Tiger Duke and his guards. They were explosive bombs. Huo Yuhao focused his gaze, then sighed in his heart. He could guess the origin of his enemies. First, there was a Class 8 stationary soul cannon shell, then there were explosive cluster bombs. It had to be the Sun Moon Empire. The White Tiger Duke took a deep breath before he turned in the air. He flew towards the bombs as his 4th soul ring continued to shine. His White Tiger meteor shower changed directions, just like a rapid-fire cannon, flying straight towards the explosive bombs. At the same time, he also shouted, "White Tiger bodyguards, listen to my orders. Disperse and retreat." It was very difficult for them to disperse in such an area. The path in front had been blown apart, making it extremely uneven. On one side, there was a cliff. On the other side, there was a mountain. They could only search for a route through the area that had been blown apart. Fortunately, there was a gentle slope that they could use to leave this place. These soldiers would never defy the White Tiger Duke's orders. After hearing his order, the captain leading the troops immediately led them towards the pathway that had been blown apart. However, the landslide shell was there to stop them from escaping. When they came to the edge of the cliff, they only saw a deep depression. The team leader of the first team was a burly man around 40 years old. As he saw the disconnected path in front of him, he seemed desolated. He quickly turned around and faced the rest of the bodyguards that had followed him, revealing a determined look on his face. His gaze swept over all the soldiers in front of him. "Brothers, we've all witnessed it with our eyes. The Duke remained because of us. If not for us, he would already be safe. We are at an impasse right now. Every second that we burden the Duke puts him in one more second of danger. Ever since we joined the White Tiger bodyguards, we knew that we were willing to sacrifice our lives for the Duke. I won't force any of you to do so now. Those who are willing to follow me, you'll always be my good brothers. Sir, I'm willing to sacrifice my life for you. Please take care." As he spoke, he took a deep look at all the comrades in front of him. After this, he turned around, suddenly pointed his left toes to the ground before he leapt off the cliff. As a section leader, Zhong Biao had managed to judge the situation they were facing accurately. Because of them, their enemies were inching closer and closer. No one knew when reinforcements would arrive. The only way to ensure the White Tiger Duke's safety was to allow him to retreat quickly, and the reinforcements to gather. However, the White Tiger Duke was unwilling to forsake them, which made them his burden. There wasn't any way they could disperse here. The only thing they could do was sacrifice their lives to save the White Tiger Duke. When he saw this scene, Huo Yuhao felt as if his chest had been hammered. The White Tiger Duke's subordinates were willing to sacrifice their lives for him, and he was willing to risk his life to protect them, too. Suddenly, he seemed to become mightier in Huo Yuhao's mind. As he pulled at Wang Donga, the two of them leapt off the cliff. Idiot! Zhong Biao, what are you doing? The White Tiger Duke was very observant, and naturally realized that Zhong Biao had leapt off the cliff. He started to turn anxious. At this point, the bodyguards all shouted at the same time, "Sir, please take care." Following this, all of them bit their lips and leapt off the cliff with determined looks on their faces. The White Tiger Duke was unmoved even when he was under the attack of that landslide shell. However, his expression changed now. His eyes turned red, and he roared to the 4 special guards that were beside him, "Idiots! Quickly, go and stop them." However, they didn't move at all. They even tried to block his view. The Soul Sage sorrowfully pleaded, "Sir, please leave. They are doing this for your safety. If you have any pity for them, quickly go now." In just a moment, the bodyguards apart from Dai Huabin and Zhulu had already leapt off the cliff. Dai Huabin and Zhulu were both stunned. Such a tragic scene appeared in front of them during this short span of time. They weren't even 20 years old. Even though Dai Huabin was the White Tiger Duke's son, he had never seen such a tragic scene before. Dai Huabin's head seemed to ring with what his father had once told him and his brother. Every White Tiger bodyguard is a loyal and brave warrior. The two of you must treat them with respect. The White Tiger Duke's eyes were blood red now, and the look in his eyes turned extremely fierce. He pulled out the box Huo Yuhao had given him earlier, tore it open, and poured his soul power into it. A ball of huge silver light quickly rose into the sky and illuminated the darkness. Very soon, it was high up in the sky. When this silver light stabilized in the sky, a silver ray descended and landed in front of the White Tiger Duke. He mimicked a lifting action, and another dim golden light ball appeared within this silver ray. This ball had a diameter of 1 meter. As it gradually rose, it seemed like a sun. It complemented the silver light ball in the sky and flew all the way up until it was next to the silver ball. The two lights complemented each other in the air and started to revolve around an invisible center. They formed an even larger gold and silver ball in the air. Yes, Huo Yuhao had given the White Tiger Duke the latest Class 9 soul tool that the Star Sky Doluo had created, the Sun Moon Divine Needle. With Huo Yuhao's current cultivation, he couldn't use this soul tool. However, the White Tiger Duke could. It wasn't difficult to use the Sun Moon Divine Needle. It just had to be unleashed before it would lock onto the opponent and then attack. The most difficult part about using it was the demand it had on one's soul power, as well as locking onto the opponents. Although the White Tiger Duke had just become a titled Doluo, Huo Yuhao was very familiar with the White Tiger. As one of the top-ranked beast souls, the White Tiger Duke's abilities would have increased significantly after he became a titled Doluo. Ordinary titled Doluo couldn't compare to him. Furthermore, he was in his prime. It was during this period of his life that his blood and energy were most vigorous. It was highly likely that he would become a transcendent Doluo in the future. Since that was the case, he shouldn't have a problem using the Sun Moon Divine Needle. Although the White Tiger Duke was filled with rage and sorrow right now, he was shocked when the Sun Moon Divine Needle rose into the sky. He felt his spiritual power rising into the sky along with the needle. His range of vision expanded greatly, and his spiritual power was being strengthened continuously. Originally, he couldn't track where his enemies were. However, they soon appeared within his perception. As the Sun Moon Divine Needle spun, his soul power was also quickly being drained. However, the attacks from his enemies had weakened when the Sun Moon Divine Needle appeared. This was how terrifying a Class 9 soul tool was. The gold and silver ball in the sky was like a huge double-colored eye, coldly watching the earth and seeking its targets. As one of the top-ranked Class 9 soul tools, there were very strict requirements for using the Sun Moon Divine Needle. It had to absorb Sun Moon essence for 3 days before it could be unleashed. In addition, it drained a lot of soul power. After 3 strikes, Sun Moon essence had to be absorbed again to charge it. However, its terrifying strength was a result of the strict requirements needed to use it. The greater the requirements, the greater the destructiveness of a soul tool. Even a transcendent Doluo would be hesitant to face an attack from the Sun-Moon Divine Needle. The greatest point about the Sun-Moon Divine Needle was that it was effective against all elements. Because of the Sun-Moon essence, any form of defense would be ineffective against it, no matter what element it was made of. In addition, it possessed the penetrating strength of a Class 9 soul tool, covering a region that spanned more than 30 kilometers. It was truly frightening. The enemy had evidently recognized the background of this Sun-Moon Divine Needle, and thus they restrained their attacks. They knew that they were exposed under the surveillance of the Sun-Moon Divine Needle. The White Tiger Duke, or rather the White Tiger Doluo, had an awe-inspiring look in his eyes. Through the Sun-Moon Divine Needle, he observed his enemies from afar. There were more than 10 of them. He zoomed in using the needle, and could clearly see the number and color of soul rings that his enemies possessed. There were a total of 12 of them. Among them, 4 were 9-ringed titled Doluo. There were even Class 9 soul engineers among them. The landslide shell couldn't have been unleashed so easily without them. Apart from the 4 titled Doluo, the lowest ranked among the remaining 8 were only soul sages. There were 4 8-ringed soul Doluo. At this point, the 4 titled Doluo were already shining with golden light. They had unleashed their invincible barriers. Another 4 of the remaining 8 had also unleashed invincible barriers. The 12 of them had completely split up, and they didn't dare to step forward even a centimeter anymore. This was the power of the Sun-Moon Divine Needle. Even Huo Yuhao didn't know that the Sun-Moon Divine Needle could make their enemies feel so fearful when it rose into the sky. Huo Yuhao's guess was completely right. These enemies came from the Sun-Moon Empire. They were here to assassinate the White Tiger Duke. The White Tiger Duke held a very important status in the Star Luo Empire. He had great control over the military. If he were assassinated, it would greatly boost the Sun-Moon Empire's future plans in starting the war. These 12 assassins were well prepared. Not only did they plant spies, but they even used high-altitude surveillance-type soul tools, a newly invented category of soul tools. Of the 12 assassins, 2 were even Class 9 soul engineers. They had set a trap 30 kilometers ahead using different kinds of soul tools. Once the White Tiger Duke fell into their trap, they were confident in killing him, even if he was a transcendent Doluo. However, they hadn't expected the White Tiger Duke to turn back after leaving his base. It was completely outside their expectations. One of the leading soul engineers realized that they had been exposed. However, the White Tiger Duke had already left his base. There were only 100 bodyguards with him, and thus it was still a good opportunity for them to assassinate him. As a result, they turned to their plan B, using the landslide shell to stop the White Tiger Duke, and rushed over as soon as possible. They were willing to pay any price to kill the White Tiger Duke. Just as they were about to achieve their goal, the White Tiger Duke didn't even try to break his way out, but remained to protect his subordinates. All of this left them extremely delighted. However, they were all stunned when they saw the gold and silver lights in the sky. More than half of these assassins were soul engineers. The 2 Class 9 soul engineers even had a wealth of experience. If these were any ordinary assassins, they might not have been bothered by the Sun-Moon Divine Needle. However, this group of assassins was well aware of what it was. The ignorant were fearless, but those who truly knew were extremely terrified. Who didn't know about the Sun-Moon Needle, the soul tool that made the Star Sky Doluo Yi Yulin famous? Among these 2 Class 9 soul engineers, one of them was even a good friend of Yi Yulin. He happened to know about the Sun-Moon Divine Needle that had just been researched and created. This was why he immediately activated his invincible barrier the moment he saw the Sun-Moon Divine Needle. Even though he knew his invincible barrier might not be able to stop the needle, it was still better than not having any protection at all. When he mentioned that it was the Sun-Moon Divine Needle, the soul engineers present also broke out in a cold sweat. The Sun Divine Needle was known as the light of the death god. Whoever it shone on would be struck dead. The power of the Sun-Moon Divine Needle was even greater than the Sun Divine Needle. Let alone a transcendent Doluo, even someone of Elder Xian's cultivation would be hurt if he tried to deal with an attack from the needle. These assassins were here to kill the White Tiger Duke, not to die. The four titled Doluor treasured their lives a lot. What do we do? Why does he have the Sun-Moon Divine Needle? Don't tell me that the Star Sky Doluor. Impossible. The Star Sky Doluor wouldn't betray us. Let's decide quickly. Our invincible barriers won't last long. Let's retreat first before coming up with a new plan. The leading Class 9 Soul Engineer was decisive, and gave the order to retreat. One's life was very precious. Everyone only had one life. None of them were willing to risk getting killed by the Sun-Moon Divine Needle in their bid to assassinate the White Tiger. None of them dared to. As a result, these 12 assassins immediately turned and fled. To them, their main worry now was finding the fastest way to get at least 15 kilometers away. The White Tiger Duke still had a glimmer of hope right now. He had seen Huo Yuhao and Wang Dong leaping off the cliff, too. That was why he didn't activate the Sun-Moon Divine Needle immediately. The strongest weapons were the most terrifying before they were used. Although he didn't know why his opponents had run, he was relieved to be safe temporarily. Right now, he could only watch and see whether the mysterious man could save his subordinates. The White Tiger Duke was holding on over on his side, while Huo Yuhao was very busy in the air right now. After he jumped off the cliff with Wang Dong immediately opened up her butterfly goddess wings. The first to jump off the cliff was Zhong Biao. The cliff seemed to be at least 300 meters high. If a Soul Master couldn't fly and didn't have any way of reducing the speed of his descent, he was bound to die from the fall. As Huo Yuhao dove down rapidly, he unleashed his spiritual power to the best of his abilities. A huge spiritual net quickly engulfed the air around him, and all the White Tiger bodyguards that had leapt off the cliff. In this way, he could tell exactly where each of them was. A streak of deep blue light shot out from Huo Yuhao's forehead and instantly descended. It was the Little Snow Lady. When the Little Snow Lady appeared, she waved her hands in the air rapidly. A gust of strong wind rose from the mountain valley. The wind slowed the descent of all the bodyguards, even though they were all decked out in armor. The Snow Empress didn't just control snow. She was the Ice Sky Snow Lady. In the extreme north, the extreme chill wasn't the only scary thing, there was also the wind. This was also one aspect in which the Snow Empress was stronger than the Ice Empress. Apart from the extreme chill, she also had a deep grasp of the profundity of the wind. For example, the snowy dance of ultimate ice included gales. Huo Yuhao was only afraid his ultimate ice would affect the bodyguards, and thus he didn't use his domain's strength to gather them. He could only let the Little Snow Lady slow their descent. As she controlled the wind, the Little Snow Lady had already charged all the way down. In a flash, she was beside Zhong Biao. She used her little hands to gently push Zhong Biao's back. He was about 30 meters from the ground, but he was now flying towards the side instead of falling as he was pushed. Zhong Biao was also a Soul Master. The sudden force that came from his side shocked him. He subconsciously lifted his body in a hurry and tried to control it. For a Soul Master of his rank, 30 meters was a manageable height. As he rolled in the air, he exploited the sudden force that came from his side to reduce the speed of his descent. He also used his palms and soul power to slow his fall. After the Little Snow Lady pushed Zhong Biao, she lifted her hands once again. Another gust of wind blew upward and slowed the momentum of the bodyguards, who were still falling. Huo Yuhao and Wang Dong finally charged down, after the Little Snow Lady helped to stall the descent of the bodyguards. At this point, the two of them reached their fastest speed. Along with the Little Snow Lady, they started flipping and moving about. They caught hold of the bodyguards that were falling from the sky. Huo Yuhao felt very regretful that he didn't have a soul tool he could use now. His soul tools were mainly very lethal. At this point, there were too many bodyguards falling, even though the area that they covered wasn't too extensive. Huo Yuhao unleashed the life-reflecting shield with his right hand and a protective barrier with his body. As he flipped about, he continued to use the Tang sect's controlling crane capturing dragon. However, he still couldn't catch everyone. As one person fell, he caught hold of him before instantly pushing him away. He used his right leg to hook onto another person, and also used his life-reflecting shield to knock someone else away. He charged forward quickly, and managed to grab hold of more than 10 people. However, he couldn't possibly catch everyone. He simply had no time. He could only knock them to the sides, just as they were about to crash, reducing their speed of descent. They were bound to get hurt, but at least they could still preserve their lives. However, there were still some bodyguards who couldn't be saved even though Huo Yuhao and Wang Dong tried their best. 300 meters. They had jumped 300 meters off a cliff, and they were all wearing armor. Their momentum was deadly. Huo Yuhao was only a Soul King, and Wang Dong was only a Soul Emperor. Even if they were slightly stronger, they couldn't possibly save that many people spread out over such a large area. Blood splattered around them, and life after life was lost. Huo Yuhao bit his lips tightly. All these soldiers were dead, because they were trying to protect the White Tiger Duke. They had jumped off the cliff willingly. Before they jumped off, they had even asked the White Tiger Duke to take care of himself. It was Huo Yuhao's first time seeing this kind of soldier. It was also his first time experiencing the smell of blood and iron that one could only experience in the military. A bloody smell spread out, and Huo Yuhao was already tearing up. He had done his best. When he grabbed hold of the last bodyguard, he discovered that his arms were already aching. He forcefully rolled on the ground, and his human-shaped soul tool let out a piercing, screeching sound. It took some time before he managed to reduce his falling momentum. However, the inertia still caused him to crash, and he couldn't help but spit out blood on the inside of his mask. There was a blurry red in front of his eyes. He felt extremely weak right now. He only heard tragic screams around him. Along with the bloody smell that drifted throughout the entire area, he was feeling very distressed. What kind of soldiers were they? They were willing to sacrifice their precious lives for their own general. They jumped off the cliff without any hesitation. Huo Yuhao and Wang Dong didn't know how many people they had saved. The entire process only took 1 minute. However, they had drained their soul power and energy. The feeling that they were experiencing now couldn't be described with words. They had tried their best in this 1 minute. However, Wang Dong couldn't help but cry when she saw fresh blood splattering from the human figures below her. Huo Yuhao peered into the sky and shouted furiously. His spiritual power soared tremendously, but he couldn't do anything now. What was supposed to happen had already happened. He couldn't have possibly saved these few precious lives. At this point, a calm voice sounded in his mind: the enemies have retreated. The White Tiger Duke is no longer in a crisis. You have passed the deep adventure round. Right now, you have 2 choices. You can choose to pass this round, or use this opportunity to restore everything back to normal. By restoring everything back to normal, those who have not yet been dead for 15 minutes will recover completely. However, those who have been dead for more than 15 minutes can't recover, as their spirits have dissipated. If you choose this option, you must go through the deep adventure round once again. You can make your choice now, but you'll only have 10 seconds to decide. After 10 seconds, the 2 of you will automatically be returned to the valley. Wang Dong naturally heard what Huo Yuhao heard. The 2 of them looked at each other, and they each saw the surprise and persistence in the other's eyes. Wang Dong grabbed Huo Yuhao's hand and the 2 of them shouted at the same time, "We'll choose to restore everything back to normal." Yes, they were willing to go through the deep adventure round once again to save all the soldiers and their loyalty. Suddenly, a strange ball of light appeared. A bright golden light that seemed like the sun appeared above Huo Yuhao's head, while a silver crescent surfaced above Wang Dong's head. The radiance of the sun and moon, yin-yang love querying. The calm voice echoed throughout the entire mountain valley. Following this, a gold and silver light spread from Huo Yuhao and Wang Dong's bodies. The bodyguards were all covered by the same gold and silver light. The bodyguards, who were still alive, were shocked as they looked at Huo Yuhao and Wang Dong. At this moment, they could roughly make out their appearance. They could clearly sense a strange, warm flow circling their bodies before the excruciating pain from their wounds disappeared. All of their injuries were healing at an alarming speed. What was even stranger was that the pools of blood on the ground started to flow back into the corpses lying on the ground. The bodies started to contort slightly. Gradually, their actions became more and more obvious. There were even some who started crawling up. The bodyguards, who had just lost their lives, seemed very confused now. They turned around and stared at Huo Yuhao and Wang Donga in shock. They couldn't believe it. Miracle. This is a miracle. Are the two of you immortals that have descended to the mortal world? Zhong Biao crawled up from the ground at this moment. He was also hurt. There were many jagged rocks on the ground, which was also the reason why many of the bodyguards were hurt and killed. However, his injuries had already fully recovered after he was immersed in the gold and silver light. This video will end here.